All right, Zach. So look, the equation of this behavior change that I'm talking about, as far as the entrepreneurial behavior change, is quite simple, right? So we have to break everything down to the brain. I think it's crazy how a lot of people like to separate themselves from their brain when their brain is literally the reason why they are breathing to this day, right? Well, I guess that was an ignorant statement opposed from their heart and all that other things. But you get what I'm saying, right? So behavior change really starts within the brain and then understanding the brain. So what we need to understand is the key is the brain loves consistency, right? The brain loves things that are not that difficult. The brain loves things that are going to save energy. The brain loves things that are familiar. It doesn't like anything that's new. It doesn't really appreciate anything that is different. It doesn't really appreciate anything that is a bit fearful. It doesn't really appreciate anything that is dramatically going to change the overall context of what it is normally used to. And knowing that and understanding that about the brain, I figured out something that has been very interesting. When you put too much of new inside of your brain, what happens is you are spiking your anxiety, you're spiking your levels of just jumping in the clouds, if you will, and not really getting in the dirt to be a practitioner because you're too fearful of making a mistake. You're too fearful of kind of screwing things up because it's such a new and creative and exciting idea that your anxiety is kind of spiking. You just don't want to touch it. It's kind of like a beautiful car you're looking at and you kind of don't want to get in it and drive it because you're afraid that you might crash the nice thing, right? So that's kind of what too much new, right? And too many creative thoughts that are popping in your head kind of does for you from a mental perspective. Now, if you have too much of the familiar, too much of the consistent, your brain gets bored with that, right? It's kind of like a relationship where you and your girl may do the same thing over and over and over again. And you're like, God damn, this is really stressful because I'm not really doing anything different. This isn't exciting. This isn't new. So the key is in any sort of corporation, in any sort of business, and particularly when a human being is trying to make that behavior change to becoming an entrepreneur, you have to understand this one variable. You put in 70% of the familiar content that is already locked deep inside of your memory banks. I'll say that again. You put 70% of the content that is already locked deep inside of your memory banks into action when making a goal. So your motivation can spike. So your creativity can spike a bit. Just your overall comfortability factor will spike. Thus, you'll be able to put consistent action in place. Now, the other 30% is where you put in hours and practices where you allocate thoughts of creativity, thoughts of something new, thoughts of something different, and you try to activate and test those and taste those and kind of become a practitioner until something spikes, and then you actually dump that information and dump that context over into your subconscious mind as well. You got that, Zach?